I moved here in the summer of 1774 to cotton stack hay from the bog at the southern edge of Coshnawagan Pond. Thomas Gray and I felled some trees. We wanted to establish a homestead the following year. We acquired the land from the Pechepscott Purchase. Most moved on, but I and some others stayed, went to make a home to keep our families and our children secure. My wife Olive and I had 7 children, so we really wanted the future to be secure for them. In 1782, Revolutionary War hero General Henry Dearborn came with a few men from Epping and claimed this land. They were part of the Plymouth Patent. A legal battle ensued between them, the Plymouth Patent, and us, the Pechepscott Purchase. It was tied up in the courts until 1810, when it was settled in the general's favor. He took it upon himself to rename the town after one of his Civil War battles. He called it Monmouth. He went back to Epping, and we, the town of Monmouth, carried on. I was involved with town government over the years. I was one of the first tithing men. We were representatives of safety and sobriety. We'd stand in the door of the church on Sunday with a long pole. We made sure that everyone observed the Sabbath. If a youngster got frolicsome, he'd get a rap on the head. If someone was starting to doze, he'd get a poke in the back. If a woman was napping, she'd get a tickle with a feather tied to the end of the pole. In later years, I delivered the mail from Winthrop to Pittston and back on horseback. I died at age 86, having served my town rightly and truly.
I was the town pauper, Susan Gray. I took shelter wherever I could and wore my life on my back. Sometimes I had shoes, sometimes I didn't. Back in the olden times, there was a pauper auction called a vendu. It was an act of charity to get the paupers off the streets. They went to work as servants in houses and fields. I was scorned and tormented whenever I went into town. So Rufus King's father took pity on me and bought me. It was an act of kindness. I was grateful. The first town farm was built in 1838. The selectmen thought the vendu was degrading and demoralizing to the paupers. Yes, it was degrading. But I guess they never had sticks and mud thrown at them just for existing. I was sent to the town farm and lived there for many years. It was there I made the acquaintance of Carrie Dodd. She had mournful eyes. We found her dead behind the barn one day. Things like that happened there sometimes. I was basically left alone. People thought I was strange, so they ignored me. I expected nothing more. I was used to it. The voices in my head kept me company. We kept each other company over the years. We told each other all our dreams and hopes, long lost. I saw many paupers come and go and die. The voices were stilled when I left this earth. I don't a stone or a marker. Paupers are buried in the back by the railroad track. I didn't hear the train go by. I wonder about the people on board. Do they even care that I existed?
My name's Harry Cochran, and now that building over there, that's kind of my memorial. Let me explain. I was born just before the Civil War. Now, my father was an architect, and most of the time he worked a long way away from home. And my mom died when I was just a youngster. So my grandparents raised me here in Monmouth. When I was a youngster, I loved music, and I composed songs and conducted bands and orchestras. But when I was 18, I fell in love with painting. I took a trip to Europe and worked with the old masters, took a tour of the Middle East. I went to places like Egypt and Syria and Palestine. I think it was some of these places that provided me the inspiration for some of the murals I painted later on. You see, I was a Freemason. My lodge is down here in Monmouth. And a lot of the murals I painted had sort of a Masonic theme to them. Oh, that building, right. In 1899, Dr. Charles Cumston approached me and asked me if I might be able to design a new town hall with a public library and maybe a facility for educational and recreational things for the inhabitants of the town. I think I managed to come up with something fairly unique and distinctive. Cumston Hall, well, that's what we called it after its donor, was the first building in Monmouth to be lit by electric lights. I married my beautiful June bride, Ida, in 1887. She was a remarkable woman. We had a lot of wonderful years together. We loved each other very much. And that love helped carry us through some of the tragedies that we encountered. We lost our only daughter to a tragic boating accident. In 1944, I lost Ida. I was heartbroken and came here to the cemetery to visit her grave almost every day. 2 years later, I joined her, and we were together again.
Daniel Ellis. I went to sea at age 19. I spent 3 years on a whaling ship and sailed around the world. I saw many lands and got to meet many people in those other countries. I returned and settled in Monmouth in 1837 and became a prosperous merchant. I shipped apples and operated the store. I was friends with Daniel Webster, even though I was a Democrat and he was a Republican. In 1850, Mr. Webster helped write and support a stricter Fugitive Slave Act. This made us abolitionists angry, and we became more involved in the Underground Railroad. The railroad helped escaping black slaves free to safety in Canada. They ran right through Monmouth, and I became a conductor. I'd seen too much of the world and knew that slavery was wrong, and escape was the only avenue to freedom. I could help. My home was large. I had a closet upstairs. I constructed a false floor that let us hide up to 6 people. My home became a station for the Underground Railroad in this flight for freedom. They stopped here on the way north to Augusta, Bangor, and to Canada. Of all that I've seen and accomplished, helping in this important mission was my proudest moment. A man can go to his final rest knowing that he's dedicated his life to helping others. find freedom.
I am Nettie Porter, and I was 24 years old when I lost you, dear Cora. You were born in the waning days of winter. You were so pale and so delicate and fragile. When I held you in my arms and I looked at you with those crystal glass eyes, I wondered, did you know how much I loved you? Were you warm? Were you safe? Your father and I cherished you, and we did what we could for you. In April, when the snow was receding from the fields, is when the angels took you away from me. I found you in bed asleep, never to wake again. You had a smile on your face, and I wondered, what were the last things you saw? So much sorrow, so much despair. It took me so many days to get the courage to put you in the cold ground. We put a little white stone to mark where you lay, and a little lamb is looking over you. When I visit your grave, I wonder, can you see the stars through the tree branches? Can you hear me cry as I lay by your humble stone? Seasons came and seasons went. Time passed without a care that my heart was broken never to heal. You were always on my mind, Cora, every single day. I saw the turning of the century and lived 17 years past that. And I rejoiced the day I got to reunite with you, Cora, where the souls lay to rest and heaven is found.
My name is Carrie Dodd. Not that anyone would remember. My husband manufactured pianos. He was a piano tuner also. We had a good life. I kept a nice home, a comfortable home. We had a piano, clothes to wear, and food to eat. Mr. Dodd traveled between Monmouth and Boston and was frequently gone. His piano was often dusty and quiet. He was away when our infant son drowned. He was away when we lost our Caroline at 5 months. I was left alone to deal with the grief of losing my babies. Our Ida, our oldest, was institutionalized at the Augustus Insane Asylum. Hysterical insanity, they called it. She died there at age 55, a lost stranger to her mother and father. Mr. Dodd passed. I became a widow. Our fortunes, if that's what you'd call them, declined. I tried, but I couldn't support myself alone. Household matters overwhelmed me to the point that as our money dwindled, our comfortable home became less so, and I lost everything. Our piano was gone. I had no money. I had no children or family to help me. I was alone. The last years of my life were spent on the town farm with the likes of Susan Gray. I never would have imagined through all the grief and heartaches I endured that I would have to depend on the town for what remained of my life. They say that I disappeared one day and I was found behind the barn dead. I say I was old. I wanted to see my children again.
I was a soldier. My eulogy is the record of my service in my country's battles in the Civil War. I enlisted in the 7th Maine Regiment Infantry in 1861. I fought in Richmond and Antietam, where I was promoted in the field for gallant conduct. After that, Chancellorsville and Gettysburg. I fought under General Grant. We crossed the Rapidan River during the Battle of the Wilderness, and then to Petersburg. I re-enlisted in the 1st Maine Veteran Infantry Regiment and was the foremost in the fight. For a considerable amount of time, I was the color bearer. The color bearer carries the flag and sets the pace for the march. Color bearers don't carry weapons, so there was a high casualty rate. Others fell, but I didn't. I never received a wound until April 1st, 1865. I was in the 6th Corps at the time. We were guarding the works on the closing day of the battle. The assault came. My right foot was blown off by a shell. Even though the damage was severe, I thought I would recover. I was hopeful and uncomplaining. But in the dark, my mind was full of the terrors I had seen, and I could not rest until daybreak. My body weakened day by day. After all the bloody battles I'd seen and the losses I endured, my strength finally gave way on May 11, 1865. My fight was over. I was a soldier.
According to an 1895 article in the Boston Globe, I was a new woman. At that time, an independent woman who resisted traditional controls and sought a complete role in the world was called a new woman. Now, in this day and age, Florence Bascom was a new woman. She was the first woman to earn a PhD from Johns Hopkins University in 1893. Me? I must have been a new woman without realizing it. I was a new woman just by doing what I had to do to survive. My husband Oscar and I owned a grist mill. It was a large operation with 3 sets of grinding stones and a flour mill. Now, Oscar was a dreamer. He was preoccupied with writing poetry and developing the white Plymouth Rock chicken. Chicken, very good for eggs and meat. However, poetry and chickens would not run a grist mill. So, after realizing that this wasn't going to change very soon, I decided I needed to step in and take over. As time wore on, I assumed more and more responsibility. I learned the operation of the machinery as well as any man. I learned that the grain was fed through the eye hole in the runner stone, that there were furrows in the actual grinding stone itself, and it was actually quite beautiful. And watching the stones grind and create flour, I enjoyed that very much. But as time went on, the more Oscar dreamed, the more I had to do. While Oscar was writing his poetry, chasing after chickens, I was waiting for the farmers to bring their grain. And so that's when I would do my embroidery and my sewing, which of course we did have to do. It was actually quite an exciting life. I ran that mill for over 30 years. Oh, don't get me wrong. Oscar was a good man in his way. And we were very, very active in the social life of the town. When there were special occasions, Oscar would write poetry for that event. And I would bake cakes with gorgeous, ornate frosting. I loved to do that. This is who we were. We just made the best of our skills and abilities. I felt that I did what I had to do, and I did it well. I died peacefully in 1908 at the age of 67. Oscar 4 years later. I wonder whatever happened to that old mill.
Asa Clow. We Clows were a seafaring folk. I went on multiple voyages on whaling vessels myself. My sons, John, Ben, and Asa, were whalers themselves. You could say that the salt water ran in our blood, which makes our story all the more tragic. My sons, Asa and John, had just returned from a whaling voyage. They were eager to go out on another with their brother, Elias. They were anxious to tell their friends of the adventures they'd had and plan for another voyage. It was a hot summer in July, and their sailboat, the Nancy Dawson, was anchored in the middle of Lake Koshnawagan. On board were my three sons, Asa, John, and Elias, and their friends, Simon Ranlett and his brother, John. They were all young men, but they should have known better. They were careless. They had left the sail unreefed and tied. Now, any sailor of the ocean should know that an unreefed sail in heavy winds is asking for trouble. Sure enough, a heavy squall brought a mighty wind and tipped over the Nancy Dawson. The boat capsized and began to sink. The boys all swam towards shore, but their heavy clothes and shoes weighed them down, and they were overtaken with exhaustion. John nearly reached the shore, but turned back to help his brothers. They all drowned. Only Simon Ranlett reached the shore that day. Their mother and I were overcome with grief. We held a vigil the following night on Norris Hill. And the next day we laid them under a shroud and laid them out under a willow tree where they spent many happy hours in their youth. My wife, Mary, felt a sorrow that only a mother could feel at the loss of her children. She died 2 years later. I lived another 14 years. I lived the rest of my days with an irony that my boys, who had survived many countless whaling voyages, met their fate and drowned in a lake. My heart was full of sorrow that I could not get rid. I kept asking myself, until the day I died, why didn't they reef the sail?
My name is Marguerite Marston. I was born in 1903. Even early on, I was a fanciful child and wished of life outside of Monmouth. When I dreamed, my dreams were full of adventurous travel and worldly travel. When I was 6, my father died from a stroke. I had to help my mother where she worked in a boarding house. When I was 11, the Great War began. It was the war to end all wars. I never thought I'd leave small-town life. When I was 14, the war finally ended. I was so excited. I ran to the town hall and I ran up the stairs to the belfry. I grabbed the rope and rang the bell over and over again. To share my joy, I rang that bell all night long. It was the summer of 1920. I dreamed of being an actress in Hollywood. My favorites were Greta Garbo and Clara Bow. Oh, I worked in Arizona. The people there frequented the place that I worked. It was a big resort. They frequented it. There were some famous people there, and I hoped I would meet one so that I could be connected with the Hollywood life. After the day of work ended, I used to walk outside, out towards the desert, outside of the resort, and dream of how my life might be. I must have been looking up at the stars one night when I lost my footing at the edge of a cliff. On January 23rd, my body was found at the bottom of that cliff. I was brought back to Monmouth, where I was buried in the springtime, when the geese were returning and the trees were budding. I had come home.